Here we go. Let's go ahead and jump to the back to the presentation. So like I said, we're going to go over a lot of different things today. I'll quickly go over the agenda. Quick intro, who I am. My name's Tyler Brinks. I'm a marine specialist for Navionics. I'm also a outdoor writer. I manage social media pages for a lot of brands in the fishing industry. Actually just got back from that Major League Fishing BPT event. I was down there doing writing for that. So really my whole life is fishing, and I fish a lot as well. So just some quick, I guess, accomplishments. I last year I fished like 75 days on the water. So I do know what I'm talking about, but I also talk to a lot of pros. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to be getting into in this presentation is things that I've learned, little tricks from writing articles about Lowrance or actually spending time with the pros. So it's going to be a combination of all those things. We're going to go over some settings, video game fishing, mapping, transducers, which is a huge one. I actually had two questions just out of the blue today about what transducer to get. That was already going to be included in this, but it's a big topic because there's so many different options out there. We're going to talk about structure scan, down scan, and 2D, more related to transducers. We're going to go over different screenshots that I've gathered, and then we'll do Q&A as well. So anytime you have a question, just go ahead and ask it. There's a section for it, and I can actually, if I see them while I'm talking and it's relevant to what we're talking about, I'll just go ahead and answer it then. And if not, we'll do it all the way at the end. Okay, so jumping into settings. So really, this is a personal preference. A lot of people change everything, or they just fish them right out of the box. And that goes for the everyday guy or the pro angler. A lot of the units that we get now, like the Lowrance units or anything that you just basically plug in and go, they're set to be pretty optimal. So there's not a lot of things you have to do. Again, it's just kind of up to preference. But I'll tell you what I do, what I change, and those are things that are going to help for seeing fish better, changing the different colors, for organizing things, and then also for just preference, colors and how those lay out. So like I said, pros point of view, I've talked to several pros that are sponsored by Lowrance that they just plug them in and go. They don't do anything at all to them. But then there's other people that change every single thing. The colors and palettes, there's so many different color options, especially to get into the colored trails and things like that, which we're going to talk about, and then the video game settings as well. So, kind of, again, this is mostly focused on Lowrance, but that number 13 palette is very popular just because it makes it easy for fish to stand out. It's kind of a brownish bottom. That's what I like to use most of the time. Like I said, it is preference. Then, I do change it obviously at night just so it looks a little bit better. And then the multiple color trails is a huge one. Okay, cool. So, I'm going to take a quick break because I do see some questions coming through. So again, if you have any questions, just ask them at any time. So one thing I forgot to mention is this will be recorded. So it will be on the Navionics YouTube probably tomorrow or the next day. They're pretty good about getting it on there. So good question. But yeah, anything else, just feel free to ask. I mean, we're going to go over everything. Okay, so here's an example of the palette that I like. It just makes it easy to see things. So I'll kind of just get into it right here, but this is a lot of bait fish on the edge of grass. That's what I saw. So that's just one of the screenshots, and we're going to go over a lot more screenshots as well. So at night, I don't fish at night too much, but this is the setting that I use. It actually makes it really easy to see at night versus something that's very blinding. If you don't night fish, doesn't really apply to you, but also first thing in the morning, it's not as bright. I mean, the cool thing about Lowrance, really all the different brands, is there's a lot of different color options that make it easier to see in different light as well. I mean, these things are bright. As you guys know, there's a lot of ways to change it, to dim it down, or to change the color as well. So like I said, I'm going to go over a lot of different screenshots and things that I've learned. I mean, this is a screenshot that I took on my graph, and you could see it's just a mess of spaghetti. I mean, we've all been there. You have a good spot, you have lots of marks, things like that. One thing that I started doing last year is changing my trail based on the day, and it's really cleared up things. And it also helps because you can actually, if say you're going through grass or whatever, an offshore piece of structure, and you're getting bites on a certain trail on a certain day, you can actually match that by going that same color on a different day. So it's really easy to do. And I think a lot of people don't do this, but you could kind of avoid this spaghetti look all over your graph, or you could delete them, but a lot of times those are really helpful. So like I said, so what path you got bites on, so you could change it all the time. So kind of what I've been doing, like in tournaments, is changing for a different color, for each day. So you can see we got the gray and the white. There's a million colors you can use, and it's really easy to do. You can also name them. This is just a screenshot I took today from mine. I wasn't very good about doing it at first, but I could have day one of the tournament, pre-fish, one for September, just so you can also do it based on the season as well. There's tons of different colors. Name them however you want to. And to get here, it's just in the files section, and then the waypoints, routes, and trails. It's something I think a lot of people don't know about, but it's really easy to do. Yeah, so good question. Perfect, Brian. Is there a way to save these trails? Yeah, you can actually export these as well as your waypoints and anything else to an SD card and then just delete them. Yeah, you could totally do that. And that kind of reminded me of something. Another very good use of these trails is if you're running through something that's maybe, you're kind of worried about safety, where you've driven and where was deep enough. It's not obviously certain, but if you've driven through there once and you could follow that exact trail, you could follow that trail through rocks or whatever it is. So that's another use of changing these different trails and colors and just keeping track of that. But yeah, you can save them and put them onto your SD card. It's easy. It's basically, I don't know if it's in the waypoints, routes, and trails. You can just export it as well as exporting any files that are on there, like your screenshots, which we'll talk about later and how to do that. But yeah, good question. Oh yeah, Kevin, I don't know if you deleted some trails, is there a way to get them back? You know, because it had a lot of trees. I don't know of any way to do it, honestly. That's why, you do want to save them or rename them, because a lot of units are set up to basically just go to a certain point, and then after they've reached that distance, they start erasing themselves and basically redrawing themselves. So changing the trail will prevent this from happening. I don't know the exact number, but I know that it doesn't go on forever. It will just eventually, as you draw more will be released. The other question from Dustin, is it possible with the TI units? I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm not 100% certain, so I'm sorry I don't know that answer, but I'm pretty sure it is. But good questions, guys. Okay, the other thing that I've started doing this year, and it's been really beneficial for reference, is using all these icons. There's all kinds of icons available on the Lowrance units. So I don't go crazy with them, but the ones that I do mark is if I find a tree, I'm going to mark it with a tree. Or if I find a rock, I'm going to mark it with a rock. Because in the past, I used to just mark anything. If I saw a bedfish or if I saw, something that looked cool. But if you look at it like a month later or 6 months later, most of the time you're not going to remember what that is, and you may be driving over to a waypoint thinking it's a good spot, but it was a bedfish that was there 6 months ago. So by doing that, you just have a better understanding of what it actually is. It does take one extra step, but when you hit that icon, that waypoint, the flag, you can actually change it. And for me, that's been really helpful, and it's actually helped me catch fish that I went back to later on. And you could definitely export these as well. All right, so now we're going to jump into some of the video game fishing, and that term is basically just looking at your graphs to see fish and drop fish, and drop onto the fish. It can be done all year long. I mean, I found that it's best in the fall and winter, and that's not always the case, but it just seems like that's when the fish are deeper, and that's where I find myself doing this more. But I've also video game fish as shallow as 8 feet under the boat. So there's fish that are not scared of the boat. You could drop down and catch them. But generally, talking about this, it's going to be, I'd say 20 to 40, 20 to 50 feet is where I'm going to be doing this. And a lot of times, summer, but then definitely the fall and winter is where I'm going to be doing this the most. There's a lot of baits you can use. Drop shots, probably the most popular, spoons, blade baits, really anything that's vertical, because you're dropping straight onto the fish. So I do think that the graph setup and then boat positioning are key. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay. So again, if you guys have any questions, just shoot them off. We'll get to them for sure. Okay. So like I said, there's a lot of baits you can use. Drop shot is probably the most popular. Like I said, those smaller 3-inch, 4-inch baits, even 2-inch baits. And the reason is they actually can get down quicker. If you think of a big worm, it's going to have more resistance as it's falling, or a wacky rig worm, it's going to fall slower. The key is you want to get down to those fish as quick as you can. So that's why I use heavier weights. And this is even with drop shot. I will use a 1/2 ounce, 3/4, or even a 1 ounce, which sounds crazy for a spinning rod with light line, but I am generally dropping it straight down. So you're not casting it. You're not risking, breaking a rod or anything like that. The faster you can get down there, the better. So like I said, blade baits, jigging spoons, and ice jigs, those are awesome for vertically fishing with video game style. The other thing that this year I just smoked them on video game fishing is a Ned rig. And, most of the Ned rig heads out there are really small, like the Z-Man ones are, a 1/5 ounce, a 1/10 ounce. I did find these. These are the Berkeley version, and they're up to a 3/8. So that is an awesome size and for a Ned rig. I don't think they're the best Ned rig head for standard Ned rig fishing, because you do want that fall or slower fall. You want that to be, that's part of the presentation of the Ned rig. But when you're video game fishing, that little tiny bait going straight down, you want to get down there as quick as you can, and you don't want to wait for that 1/5 ounce thing to fall 50 feet. Trust me, you don't. But that's something I've learned, and I caught tons of fish video game fishing with the Ned rig. So this is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's Berkeley. Okay, good question, Dana. We're going to jump back to that one because we're talking about the waypoints before I forget it. But the question is there a way to have a few favorite icons for waypoints instead of having to look through all of them? I don't think so, but there is. If you set it as, say, like that tree icon, the next time you do it, it will also be a tree icon. So that's really the only thing. If you're out there graphing, looking for a lot of similar things, it's really easy. But I don't think if there's a way to set like a default or a favorite. It's basically just whatever you did last time. But yeah, good question there. And I use a lot of those other icons too. Like if I see fish that are cruising, I'll put a ghost icon or the little swimmer icon, all those things. So just in my head, I can remember what I was looking at if I come back the next day or the next week to see if it's even worth, stopping again. But yeah, good question. Oh, okay, good question, Dustin. So what part of the country are you regularly fishing? I forgot to mention that, but I live in Spokane, Washington. That's generally where I fish, but this past year I fished the US Open on Lake Mead. So I was down there for like 6-7 days. That's in Nevada. And then I fished in Florida, South Carolina, Atlanta, Lake Lanier in Georgia, and then New York twice. So really all over the place, but generally West Coast. I think that's all that I fished. But a lot of this is focused to Northwest, but really just West Coast fishing, but it will apply anywhere. So good question. Oh, cool. Kevin, that's a good question. He's talking about interference with, and I think that's a transducer thing. So we'll get to the different transducers and things along those lines. So we'll get to that, Kevin. Oh, good question, Jesse. So is the water normally clear or stained and dirty? That I kind of have like, generally it's pretty clear where I live and where I do this, but I've learned that just because it's maybe dirty on the top, a lot of times it's still pretty clear down this deep. And I've done a lot of underwater camera stuff, and I have a buddy who has this underwater drone, and you'd be surprised how clear it is down under the top. Even if it's dirty up top, down below it's not always the same water clarity. So generally it's pretty clear, and I think really with any of these finesse tactics or video gaming, you want it to be clear somewhat, but it can be stained as well. Okay, so this is a great question. I'll have these questions, guys. Keep them coming. So Craig says he fishes saltwater with a bunch of current, and then a lot of times he's dropping 50 to 80 feet, and it's a challenge even with the spot lock on the trolling motor. Any tips to use your technique? I mean, the simplest, probably easy answer is just heavier weights. It sounds obvious, but dropping it, the faster it's going to get down there, the better. And we'll talk about, I think it's on the next slide, kind of about boat positioning. Let me see. Yeah, so I think it's the next slide. Let's see. Nope. So okay, so another thing with video game fishing is just making sure that you know exactly where your transducer is. So for your situation where there's a lot of current, that is pretty challenging. So you may have to think about the way the current's going and do some experimentation by casting up current to see it on the graph. What I mean by that is cast out and then just kind of test how long it takes to get pendulum down below you. So I've never really fished that deep in current, so I can't say for sure, but in theory, that's what I'm thinking. Would be the best way to do it is just a little bit of experimentation and heavier weights. Yep, West Coast. Where are you from, Dustin? Go ahead and comment on there. Okay. Okay, so this is a question from Jeremy who fishes the California Delta a lot. And he wants to know about tides. Is there a way to set favorites? Let me get back to you on that because I know that there is a tide feature on your Lowrance in Navionics, but I actually have never used it because I don't fish any tidal water. So that may be something that I'm gonna have to follow up with you. So after we're done with this, I'm gonna give you all my contact information. So if anyone has any questions they think of afterwards, or if you're watching the recorded version on YouTube, you can go ahead and send me a question. We'll get all those answered. Okay, cool. Good job, guys. A lot of questions. Okay. So yeah, going back to this. So yeah, Ned rig. I can't believe that stupid thing works so good. Okay, so going back to my settings. So like I said, this is personal preference. So today I went on my graph and took screenshots of the exact settings that I have for everything, and I'm going to go through each of these. The only thing that's not true is this right here, because I didn't have it plugged into a transducer. I had it plugged into a power unit inside of my house. So depending on the transducer, there's going to be a lot of different settings here. And generally, I'm going to just put it the highest setting that it comes with. You may have a 200, 500 transducer. You may have the 283. There's the one that I have, the HDI is actually a 455. So whatever you have, generally, I'm going to say the highest setting is going to be the best because it's going to be the most powerful setting. So there's a lot of transducers out there. So the range, I always set that at auto. Sensitivity, I just put that up 1. I mean, it's like I said, they're pretty general. I mean, they're generally pretty good how they are set up out of the box, but I'll just bump it up a little bit. I want it to be a little bit more sensitive, not crazy sensitive, because you start losing, it kind of changes the view on your screen. Color line, the 76%, that's just basic. So those are just, I didn't really do much at all with those. Now, these are ones that I do actually adjust, and the noise rejection, I put that at low. I think it's low, medium, and high. So the problem is if you have it high, you actually don't see everything that's down there because it will kind of filter everything. Same with this surface clarity. If you want it to be higher and clear, you're going to actually lose some picture that's down there. So I set it for low. So it's not always the cleanest, perfect looking screen, but it is going to be more true of what you're seeing below the boat. That's my theory, at least. You're not going to miss anything. Oh, go back. So I hope that answered your question, Dustin. So what is noise rejection? So really, it's just like sonar noise. So it doesn't change how's the best way to describe it? It doesn't filter out anything. Is really the only way I could think of saying it. Scroll speed, I just have that normal, and then I have the ping speed max. That's going to be more pings of the sonar, so you're going to get a better picture because it's going to be shooting back down more often. So those are settings that I do, but again, this is all preference. And I'm going to show you some screenshots. And I want you to take a look at this. So this one's pretty grainy, and then I'll show you another one that I've done with a different transducer, and it's much more clear with those same settings. So that's why I'm saying the transducer does make a big difference. So what you're seeing here is this is my bait going down. You can see them right there. There's fish down there. You can see there's a couple of them swimming around. This is me working my blade bait up and down right there. And then this is the point where one bites it, and this is me reeling the fish up. So that's what you want to do with video game fishing. You can see this is 48 feet deep. It's 46-degree water. This is probably I'd say it was like early November, where I live in Spokane, Washington. That time of year, I'm like looking down, my neck hurts because I'm just staring at my graph straight down all day, a lot of the days. But this is really what you want to see. You want to see those fish moving, you want to work the bait through them, and then you want to obviously bring that fish up. So you can see here, you see how much clearer this is? This is just me using a different transducer. And we'll talk about that transducer. And basically, it's the difference between something that's mounted inside the trolling motor, one of the ones that are built in, or the ones that are mounted outside. And I can't believe the difference in how clear it is, but it still has all those settings that I was talking about, the low noise rejection, the low surface clarity. So like this would be the surface clarity up here. You know, there's kind of this fuzz up here, same here, or the noise rejection. You know, that doesn't bother me at all because I'm just looking down here. You know, there's another thing that you can do as well that I haven't done yet, but a lot of people have talked about, and that is you can actually set it to just show the bottom 10 feet. So it's actually going to be a bigger picture of what you're seeing. So you're not going to see all this. I haven't done that yet, but that's a trick that one of the pros told me. You know, if they're only on the bottom, you can just set it like that, and it's just going to be a bigger screen of that bottom 10 feet. So that's something I'm going to try next year just to see if I like it or not. But I kind of do like to see the bait falling and seeing how fast it goes and things like that, so I know where it's at all times. Okay, so this is another fish catch. You know, these are just fish that are on the bottom, drop down, basically caught it right away. And that's the thing with video game fishing is most of the time you don't have to sit there and shake it too much. You know, if you're using those heavy weights, and this is mostly bass, but I've caught tons of other species that I've incidentally that were on the bottom, you know, pike and trout and walleye and all these other fish. They do the same thing. Usually if bait drops right in their head and they're that deep or they're that close to the bottom, they're going to eat it pretty quickly if they're going to eat it. So this is another example of just me working the bait up and down. You know, this is a lot of fish down there that didn't bite though. This is actually me coming back up. This is looks like bait fish here is what I would guess, but you could see all that fuzz and stuff on there. Again, I don't, it doesn't bother me at all. Yes, yeah, sorry I didn't answer that, but this is set up on the front transducer. So this is on my trolling motor up front. Now I have caught fish video game fishing from the back of the boat, and that takes a little bit more. It's more of a challenge because it's harder to direct your trolling motor to stay on top of the fish. But I've looked back and saw a fish that I've went past, jumped to the back of the boat, looked that it was now under the boat in the back, and dropped it straight down. So the biggest thing is just knowing exactly where your transducer is. If it's like mine is set up on the back, right between the power pole and the engine, so I can drop right in between that hole and be there in the back. But yeah, these screenshots are all from the front of the boat. Okay, good question. So Chris wants to know, when do you suggest using Chirp? And if you guys aren't familiar with Chirp, it's basically just a more powerful sonar that has better target separation. It's basically just stronger. So really, I would use that anytime if you have a unit that's capable and you have a transducer that's capable and it works. I would use Chirp, definitely. So good question, Dean. So, you know, what would you actually use surface clarity for? Honestly, for my use, I don't use it. It doesn't really see anything, but I guess one purpose would be as if you were, you know, maybe you're like trolling for fish that were on the surface or something. There is a use for that. People do use it, but for me, I don't even pay attention to it. Yeah, I do use high chirp, that Ernest. Yeah, there's high, medium, and low, and you know, my view is just the stronger the better. Okay, I'm reading a question here, guys. Okay, so I'm trying to understand this, Kevin. Just I'm reading it again. I have a point. So okay, I get it now. Okay, so he has the point one antenna, and if you guys aren't familiar with that, it's basically just a more accurate antenna, and I do run that, and I actually have it on the front where most of the people have it on the back. That's you have to be very careful when you mount that antenna because it does get some interference. It has to be a little so far away from metal, or it can have some interference. But he's saying when he sets it on the back, because most people have it on the at the console, um, so there's going to be a distance. So if you go back to that spot, from the front of the trolling motor, it's going to be, however long your boat is away from that spot. Yeah, so it is saved to that location. So there will be, it's a little tricky. You're right, because that's why I mounted it on the front, because it could be 20 feet away from the spot, but it's going to get you close, and then you should be able to mark it again on your front graph. But that is going to be a different waypoint based on where it's at. I hope that answers your question. I hope that makes sense. But that's why I mounted that up front, because there could be a 18-foot gap between that and the back, or even 10 feet. It could make a difference. Yeah, so John, these pictures are from my trolling motor, but you can actually take screenshots from the back as well. All of the Butch, all these screenshots were from the front from the trolling motor. Yeah, and Robert makes a good point. There's a lot of suspended fish that you can also do this for. Generally the fish that I fish for in Washington State, they're not chasing a lot of like nomadic shad or anything. We actually have no shad here, so there's not many times when they are suspended compared to how they are in other parts of the country. But suspended fish, yeah, you can definitely do the same thing. If they're suspended halfway down, you see them, you can drop a bait right in front of them and do the same thing. For me, it's generally the bottom. Good question, Doyle. So how do you know that those are fish down there? It's mainly because of this red that's down in here. So that's what the sonar is showing. It actually has a different look than if it's grass or if it's, a log or something like that. It's just based on the sonar return and also experience of, catching a lot of those fish that you see. You'll start to see what they look like. I'm going to go over some screenshots in a little bit, and those are, different things that I've seen that, grass and structure and things like that. And if they're arches or if they're streaking, those are guaranteed fish. Yeah, this is another good question, Scott. So he's talking about the bottom composition. So is it a little softer here? Yeah, definitely. So you can see it's all red here. So this is either going to be a little bit of mud because it's a different color. It has a different return. There's a little bit of yellow in there. So I would say, yeah, it's definitely softer. And Mark, I'm pretty sure this was from my HDS Carbon, but it could have been from my HDS Gen 2 Touch because I switched kind of mid-year, but I can't remember exactly when I took this. Even it was 46. No, actually, I think this was from the year before, so this is a Gen 2 Touch. Bruce, we'll get into the different transducers in a minute. Yeah, and John too. We'll talk about the built-in transducers. I'm just not a fan of them just because I just think they're not as not as accurate as something that's mounted on the bottom, mounted outside. You're definitely going to risk knocking them off more if you mount them on the outside. But in my opinion, you're just going to get a much better picture. You're not going to have as much interference. And if you look at a lot of the pros, they all have their stuff mounted on the outside, and that's kind of why I switched. Yeah, Charles, that great point. So he says, this is very similar to ice fishing and using our graphs. Yeah, definitely. It's the same exact thing. It's dropping down to fish that you see. And another way to do it is if they're suspended fish, you can use just a small, almost like ice fishing bait, like those ice jigs that I was talking about, or a little 3-inch plastic on a jig head. You can do the same thing. So it is pretty similar to ice fishing. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. John, I'll start reading the whole question. Okay, so Kim, hey, what's up, Kim? Are you able to get suspended fish to bite? And if so, are you still jigging the bait in front of them or staying constant? You know, suspended fish have a reputation of being really hard to catch, and they are hard to catch, you know, because they're not hugging the bottom. You know, they're kind of moving. They're looks most of the time they're going somewhere. So you can jig the bait in front of them. Most of the time, excuse me, when I'm doing this, I am dropping to fish that are on the bottom. But I have, like I was just mentioning, that 3-inch bait on a small jig head. I have caught some fish doing that. It's actually a technique I learned about called freestyling, and you basically just keep it right above the fish, drop it down to where they are, and just don't let it go below them, and just keep it above them. So that's very similar to ice fishing. Okay, so Jim asks, do you want to use do I use down imaging as well as traditional sonar? I like traditional 2D sonar for this almost exclusively. I think it's just easier to see things. You know, down imaging is very clear, but I think it's easier to see your bait just because of the screen. So I don't use that. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, so Kevin, good question. He says he installed the Lowrance Hook 4 on his boat and he put it on his trolling motor. And every time he turned the trolling motor on, he'd get interference. Is there anything you can do to eliminate this? Do you have a built-in transducer inside your trolling motor or is it external? And it could, yeah, I'm not really sure. We're going to go ahead and move on, but just if you could respond and just say, you know, how you have it mounted. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, boat positioning is very key with this. You know, you have to know where you're at because if you think about it, if the wind is moving you around and you drop your bait could be 5 feet or 10 feet away from what you're seeing on the screen. So you have to really be mindful of that and try to stay as stationary as you can because you may be dropping on a fish that's 6 feet to the left or 10 feet to the left or whatever it is. So that's why the faster you drop it, the better. So what I'll typically do is as soon as I see something, I am dropping straight down and even pointing my rod up so the line comes off my spool faster if I'm using a spinning reel or again, using a heavier bait. You also want to watch how the fish is acting. You know, if there's streaks, you know, that means they're moving quickly. You know, they're possibly eating something. So those are going to be the aggressive fish. You know, and like I said earlier, typically they're going to bite instantly if they're aggressive. It's just a reaction strike, but in deep water. Yeah, that's so Kevin got back to me. He said it was mounted on the outside of the trolling motor. That's interesting. I haven't really had that kind of interference with the external transducers. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't help you there, Kevin. I'm not really sure. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, transducer, it sounds really simple, but just know exactly where it is. If you're looking down and it's mounted on your trolling motor, drop it straight under there. And obviously be careful with the prop. You don't want line wrapped around it. And then again, if it's in the back, know exactly where it is. External versus internal. The one that I use up front is the HDI. So that is actually 2D sonar plus down imaging. And I'll show you which one it is. So this is it right here. This is before I mounted it. It has a little adapter, so it mounts under there. It's the 83-200 and 455-800, and it does have chirp as well. So that's a great transducer, and they're really pretty inexpensive, and I'm just a huge fan of it. But I still have my trolling motor still has an internal, and I still have that cable up there. It's just not plugged in, but that's in case I knock one of these off or in case this one starts messing up, I actually have a backup. So that's you know, it's not my favorite way to do it, but I actually have two options in case something happens to this one. Okay, so let's see if we have any more questions. I'm going to talk about mapping a little bit. Cool, yeah, we do have some questions, so we'll get into that. So Doyle says, if you use braid, do you think it's important to black out the lower portion of your line or use a longer fluorocarbon leader? Well, I don't think so because I always use a fluorocarbon leader, and I actually use high visibility lines, so I actually don't think that. But if it's if it's pitching or something like that, sometimes it does make a difference to black it out because line can fade over time. But I actually like high vis braid. I actually use the Seaguar Smackdown high vis flash green. 20 pound with an 8 pound Tatsu leader. I use that all the time and for a lot of different techniques. And as far as the fluorocarbon leader, I have the fluorocarbon leader just long enough so it doesn't go through the spool of the reel. So you're talking 8 feet or so, about 5 feet through the rod and then a couple feet out of it. Yeah, good point, Ty. So going back to that question about the interference, I mean, it's possible that it could be connect to the fish finder, connect to the trolling motor battery. That's one option. That's just from Ty. Okay. And then here's another question from Jesse. Is my HDI cable connected just to the structure point on your HDS carbon? So the HDI transducer is just plugged in into the same spot that I put any transducer. Hopefully that answers. It's a blue connector. Good. So you guys are actually helping out. So another thing that may help for the question about the interference, he said Tony said he would isolate the ground for the Lowrance unit to get rid of that interference. So hopefully one of those works for you. Yes, good. So Charles, good point. So he said, is it true the internal transducer is only one system set, such as only 2D? Yes, for Lowrance, they're 2D. You know, some of the Ultrex for Hummingbird, they actually have the mega imaging and things like that built into it. But generally, the internal is just going to be for your 2D. So having that HDI transducer that I have will also allow you to do down scan as well. Even though I kind of mentioned I don't use that much from the front, I do use it a lot from the back, you know, as I'm idling looking for fish. But I do have that option if I want to see it. Craig, we're getting right to your question in a second here. Got a couple more video game questions. So Dean wants to know, what knot do I use to connect braid to fluorocarbon? So this is a age-old question. There's so many people have preferences. I used to use the double uni, the uni to uni, but now I use the modified Albright. Both of them are very easy to tie, and I'll explain why I use the modified Albright. So the double uni is pretty quick to tie. The problem that I was having with it, I would never lost any fish, but I would actually get hung up and I would pull it and it would break. And I didn't like that at all. So with the modified Albright, you don't do that as much. So there's a lot of YouTube videos on how to tie it. I actually think it's faster to tie, but that modified Albright's definitely my favorite. So Mark asked, can you use the HDI on a Gen 2 unit that is not touch? I am not certain on that, but I definitely used it on the Gen 2 touch and it worked fine. Okay, we're gonna go back to that transducer slide for Patrick. He wanted to see it. This is the one I'm using now, HDI. There's actually several of the HDI ones. This is one of the questions that I just had today or yesterday. He wanted to know which one because there's several ones. This is the one that I have because it actually has the 455 and 800. Okay, so going back to more not questions. So Craig says Alberto. I think it's probably the same thing. I've heard it called a million things. Alberto, Crazy Alberto, Modified Albright. Basically, it's 8 wraps down, 8 wraps back. And that's another thing that varies too. Some people like 7 and 9 based on the braid and fluorocarbon. Some people do 6 and 6. I use 8 down and then 8 back up. Yep. So John says, in the past he used the double uni and he switched to the Alberto as well. So that's, again, it's the same thing. He says it's fast and strong and like a Chinese handcuff. Yeah, definitely. I want a finger trap, I think. I've never been in Chinese handcuffs. Okay, we're gonna go ahead. So good question. So we're gonna get into the different maps, and this is exactly what Craig just asked, or I think it was Craig that said that. Yeah, Craig. So he said he recently upgraded from the Navionics Plus to Hot Maps Platinum, and he doesn't notice or see any difference. Is there one? Yes, there is, but I'm gonna go ahead and explain that. So there is basically 3 main Navionics maps. We have the Navionics Plus regions. It's 149 bucks. So as you see here, there's different regions. They're chart cuts that based on, if you're west or if you're south or anything like that. That is an awesome, awesome card. I mean, I use that card. And the only time that it would maybe make a difference for you is if you lived, say, like Colorado, but you lived in Kansas, or you fished both of them. Then you'd have to get 2 cards. So they also have the Navionics Plus card that is all the United States and Canada. It does cost more. Basically, it just comes as a card, and then you download the area that's important to you. So you don't have to download the whole West. You can just do all these states that you fish, or whatever the case. There's a lot of instances where that's going to be better for somebody. You know, here in Washington State, we have people that fish in Canada as well. So if they were doing the regions card, they would need the West, and then they'd also need the Canada card. So the Navionics Plus, the regular one, allows you to just, like I said, download the area that's important to you. The Hot Maps Platinum is $199, and that is also regional. So all of these have switched over in the last year or so, where they're going to be the exact same level of map detail. Okay, so in the past, they used to have a premium and a platinum. So one was actually a better quality map and more detail. Now they're all going to be the same detail. So the only difference, Craig, is the Hot Maps Platinum is going to have the 3D view, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then also the satellite overlay. So those are two things that are different, and you do get with only the Platinum card. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a quick thing. Navionics has this on their website. It's free. It is the chart viewer. It used to be called the web app. You just basically go to navionics.com, hit chart viewer, and then you could actually see the level of detail. You know, say you fish some random lake, you know, that, you know, you don't know if it has mapping or not. You can use this before you go buy a card. It will show you exactly what's going to be on the card. Just make sure you hit this button right down here. It's the SonarChart button. It looks like a little, you know, sonar beacon or radio beacon or something, but click that so you can get the most level of detail. And then basically when you go to the website, it pops up exactly where you are. You know, I just took the screenshot, and actually, yeah, it's a little bit over from where I was. I wanted to at least show some water, but it will just pop up wherever you are. So here's a couple mapping tricks that I've learned. So one thing is the SonarChart, and that is just make sure that you always have that enabled. We'll talk about that. Same with the community edits. We'll talk about the 3D and satellite overlay, which is, again, is only for the Platinum card, and then the contour depths, and then shading. So the contour depths is actually going to help speed up your mapping and your processing. And then the depth shading is a way that you can actually adjust for low water. And all the mapping that Navionics has is set at 0. So that means the water level is full pull, 0, whatever you want to call it. So if you fish a lake that's, you know, 20 feet low, you're going to have to do those depth shading. You know, if it's in the fall, it's really low, but you can do it. And I'll show you how to do it in a few. Okay, we're going to kind of speed up a little bit. Lots of questions. It's awesome. So sonar charts. So you can see on the left, this is without SonarChart, and then you hit this little SonarChart button, and this is what you're going to get. This is to get the full 1-foot contours. So there's a huge difference. So make sure that you hit that button for SonarChart. On older units, it's called Fish and Chip, but it's the same exact thing. It just makes more sense now. They used to call it Fish and Chip back in the day. So you can see it's a huge difference. And you can see how I have the shading, which we'll talk about. There's different colors on there. Okay, so community edits. To do this, you must have a current subscription. When you buy a Navionics card, it's good for a year. And then you can also do it on the app, and it's going to show fishing spots, hazards, and more. So you could see this one is not enabled. And then I go ahead and clicked it, and you could see there is a little fish icon, and I hovered over it, and it says spring. So people put these spots on there for whatever reason. Maybe this is a spring, or it was a good spot in the spring, who knows. But these are user generated things. But I have found spots that say hump or things like that I never knew about, and actually have caught fish because I checked them out and went over there. You know, so again, these are user entered. But there's also hazards too. I found, you know, rocks submerged, things like that. So it is nice to have, you know, maybe not just for fishing, but also for safety as well. So this is that 3D view that you can do with the Platinum card. This is what it looks like. I personally don't like it and never use it, but this is what it looks like. It just kind of tilts it. You know, really, if you were fishing some very big drops, say like saltwater where it drops 50, 60 feet, this is going to be a lot more dramatic. And I think there is a lot of use for that. But for me, I don't use it. Satellite overlay. This is another thing that you can get with the Platinum card. You can change the transparency. So it's going to be basically like a full Google Earth image, or it's going to be kind of faded out like this. So the thing with this is it's really cool to have, but it's not every single lake. You know, it just kind of depends on the maps that they have available. So some places it's very helpful because the maps are really clear, and you could see things like the changing of the the bottom. You could just tell by the color, where it's actually on the shore has got darker, or it's changed to something, and that may be a good area because it may go down further into the water and be a good transition spot for fishing. So it is helpful, but again, this is only for the platinum card. So this is something that I've learned as well, is the contour depths. So on the contours, you can actually set it to be only show 18 feet, 30 feet, or 60, or all. I have it set for 60 because I'm never going to be, I don't see any instance where I'm going to be fishing over 60 feet. So I don't really care about that. So it just speeds up the processing as you're driving. It lets you just focus on where the fish are. And how to get there is menu, chart options, settings, and then contour depth. So this is a perfect example. This is Lake Ponderay, where I fish a couple times a year. So you can see down here, this is like 690 feet. So I am never going to fish out here. There's no way. So I don't even want to see that. I don't want it slowing down my unit. I don't want anything to do it. But this is just a very dramatic example. But even on a normal lake that's pretty deep, it's just going to make things a lot easier. And you're driving down the lake, this is where you want to fish if you're bass fishing. So depth shading, this is a question I got when I posted about this not too long ago. That's something people wanted to know, because there's not like a set way to do it with Lowrance and Navionics, not a very easy way. On the app, it's very easy to do. And as you change the water level on the Navionics app, it will actually change the numbers and basically remove anything that's under that depth. So for low water instances, it's perfect. But on a Lowrance unit, you're going to have to do it a little bit different. You're going to go to menu, chart options, view, and fishing range. And I'll show you what that looks like. So this is an example of a lake that I fished, and I did this, and you could see the different colors. It's not going to remove the contours, but basically everything in a certain color, this white, and I didn't have it exactly what it was set as, but anything in white is going to be like basically out of water. But you could see I did fish along there. So I didn't set it the exact depth, but you can do that. So basically, if the water was down 20 feet, you would set the min to 0 and the max to 20. It's very easy to do. Just adjust it like that, and it's going to change the color. As you can see in this example from a video I did, just because it was kind of easier to see, everything between 19 and 26 feet is a certain color. So it's blue, and that does vary based on the generation of Lowrance that you have. Some are backwards, but it's going to be blue or white. But this is also a good tool if, say you're catching fish, throwing a crankbait between 10 to 15 feet. You can set it to be 10 to 15 feet, and you're going to drive around the lake, and you're going to see a narrow ribbon of just that depth. So besides just adjusting it for water level, you can actually use it for fishing, and I've done that as well. Okay, this is another thing that I do as well, live mapping. So you can do this with SonarChart Live. This is my iPad connected to the Wi-Fi of my Lowrance unit. This is actually from a couple years ago. This is a Gen 2 Touch. So I used to have the Go Free wireless. Now the newer units have built-in wireless. So what this does is it allows you to map. You can do it on your screen, but if you want that data to be permanent, you're going to have to do it on an iPad or a phone. And when you get your iPad back to your home Wi-Fi, it will send it to Navionics, and it will improve the mapping. I do that every time I go out. I just set it, connect them, throw this iPad into one of the compartments, and then when I'm done, it's dead because it ran all day. Plug it in, it connects to my Wi-Fi, sends it to Lowrance, and then it improves the mapping. So it's a lot easier on the units that have Wi-Fi built into it, because you don't have to have that Go Free wireless box, but it still works. So that's where it goes. So if you have it just set up on your unit like this, it will be really cool. It will actually change it on your unit, but it will not send it to Lowrance at the end. So you still need to have your iPad connected or your phone connected. So that's one way to do it. But if you have it set up on your unit, this is what it will look like. This is when I was down in Lake Mead. You could see it's actually changing the contours as I was going. This is another example of that white. This white was all out of water because the water was really low. And then this was actually some fish going crazy. These were actually stripers. I caught one and realized they were not bass because it was 60 feet deep and they were just little stripers. But yeah, that was another video game fish and
pretty deep water. Okay, so we'll talk about this and we'll get to your questions, and we'll try to get out of here on time. We had a lot of good questions, so I appreciate it. It makes it go a lot easier. So this is a side scan. I usually use side scan or structure scan, as it's actually called for Lowrance, by idling, looking at my graph. And I will do this all the time with structure scan. This is actually grass with fish on it. And I actually went over there and it was just a million bluegill on this grass line. And that's what that was. And, a lot of you guys, if you live where there's shad, you will see this, similar stuff to this. But these little specks were all bluegill. I just went over and checked them out myself. But structure scan too, another thing is, you don't have to always be idling. I've learned that you can actually be going 10 or 15 miles an hour, basically barely on pad, and then slow down, and you could cover water really quickly. You have to be watching it really, really closely because things just go a lot faster. But I found some awesome spots doing that, going 15 miles an hour, and you could just cover way more ground doing that. And then with the Lowrance, the touchscreen, you just scroll back to what you saw, or if you have an older unit, just use the cursor back and hit that waypoint and come around and fish it. I found a spot this fall on Long Lake around here that was awesome, and I caught several 4-pounders on it, and it was a spot that I found just going down the bank, driving and looking, and I found a spot I never even knew was there. So it does work. So here's another screenshot interpretation. Like I was talking about those fish streaking, this is a fish that came up and went back down. So I'm not 100% certain what that is, but I'm thinking it's some bait fish, just because it just looks like bait fish to me. Here's another one. This is, again, when I have that, before I had the HDI transducer, you can see it's a lot not as clear, but these are a bunch of fish streaking as well. Okay, this is another thing, then we'll get to the final question. So if you take a screenshot, we've all done this before, where you take a picture and you can see the water spots and you can see me and everything else. I just did this because I wanted to show the water temperature, like it was super early in the year. But if you hit the power and pages button, it will actually save a screenshot. So it's going to look like this. It's going to have everything that's on your screen. What you have to do then is go to your files and export those to an SD card. So it's definitely a lot more work than just taking a quick cell phone picture, but you're going to get a lot better pictures like this. I mean, this is screenshots. They're actual shots, and it shows all the depths, everything that's showing on there, and it's just really easy to do. It's just like a smartphone, just power and pages. Okay, so we're going to get into these questions. There's a whole bunch. We'll see how many we can get through, and I'll leave this page up for a minute, but feel free to email me at my Navionics email, or find me on any of my social stuff. I'm be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Okay, so we're going to jump into some questions. Okay, so Alan says he has the Regions East, which was $149, and he attempted to upgrade. I'm not sure on that, Alan. I don't know why it wouldn't be available. That's interesting. So you may have to hit me up after this. Yeah, so Doyle has a question. He has a Navionics Plus US and Canada. And he said, can you please explain about purging your card? So basically, like I was saying earlier, the Navionics Plus card comes standard with the whole United States and Canada, but just the not very good mapping. It's just the government charts, the basic data. So then you actually download a region that you want to fish. So he wants to purge his card. So you should be able, is it too full? Is that what's going on? Yeah, respond to that, and I'll see, because there is a limited amount of data that it can have on there, and then at some point you have to purge it to re-download it, because there's a lot, if the area is a lot of lakes, or you pick too big of an area, you can run into a space issue. So I'm not sure exactly the whole thing there. Oh, good question, Ernest. So which card will sync with your iPad and Gen 3 and then sync your waypoints while you're in your living room? So really, it's any of the cards that has an active Navionics account and subscription. So that's something that's called Plotter Sync, and I didn't even mention that because it's more the app, but it's very cool. Basically, if you're like he's saying, in your living room, looking at your iPad or your phone, and you find some spots that you want to fish, you mark those on your app, and then through Wi-Fi and through Plotter Sync, you can actually transfer those to your Lowrance units. So they'll actually show up on your Lowrance units when you go out there. So if you have a current subscription, you can do it. A current card that's active, and a unit that's able to do that as far as Wi-Fi. But it's awesome to be able to do that. You could transfer any spot that way. It's, you know, it beats the old way of doing it where you'd have to actually write down the coordinates and then plug them in to your graph. I mean, that's just a lot of work, and it's pretty easy to mess it up too. Okay, yeah. So Kent, yeah, unfortunately the community edits portion is not on the Elite TI units. You know, it just has to do with processing and how much data they can have. If it says it's not allowing it to do it, I'm not 100% certain that it's not capable of doing it, but that may be that's got to be what it is, that it's just not able to do it. So that's the only thing I could think of. Okay, let's see if we have any more. Okay, so Dana says, is there a way when you're recording sonar to mark a hazard that will show up in the upload, but not your waypoints and routes? No, there's not a way to do that where, so you're saying to upload it to Navionics to mark a hazard, you're gonna have to do that through community edits, and you're gonna have to do that through your app. You know, if you find a hazard, you can just mark it on your app and do it. Cool. You're welcome, Terry. Thanks for he just said thank you for your session. Appreciate it. Thanks. And thanks everyone for attending. We had awesome questions. This is great. Jesse says, what setup do you have for your side scanning? I just have the structure scans transducer. I think it's the HD is what it's called. You know, I haven't actually used the 3D module yet. Okay, so Kevin, yeah, so that interference. Yeah, I mean, it could just be how it is. I mean, if you have the, he's talking about, it was going back to that interference question we had with the trolling motor. So it could be, and he had the external transducer. I think it's still a power issue, honestly. Okay. All right, guys. Well, I really appreciate you all for attending. I'm going to go ahead and tell you about my next webinar. It's not for a few months, but we're going to be talking about smallmouth, understanding smallmouth. And if you fish for them, you know, that's like, it's hard to understand them. I can't say I'm an expert on it, but I do like smallmouth, and I do know a little bit about them. So we'll be covering that, everything that I've learned from going after smallmouth. I love those things. Okay. So again, one more time, we're gonna have this recorded. It will be on YouTube probably tomorrow on Navionics, and I'll put it on my personal YouTube as well. But awesome questions, and we'll see you at the next one. All right, thanks everyone.